I studied pure philosophy at university. I've always interested in human identity, what it is to be human, how you might describe it, how you might think about it. And I hadn't. Then after that I went to art school and trained as an fine artist. And my work was, doing a lot of working a lot around feminism and aspects of that. But then I collapsed in my studio one day, working very hard, having, I think, inhaled too many white spirits through the materials I was working with. And I ended up eventually with a suspected brain hemorrhage, which thank goodness I didn't have. And I found myself on a hospital operating table, looking into my brain real time on a monitor while they scanned me. And it just seemed to me completely and utterly freaky to be seeing yourself thinking, looking, and it also tied in completely with my fascination with what it is to be human. So then I got better very quickly. There was nothing wrong with me that they could identify, which was lucky. And as soon as I was better, I got in touch with the neuroradiologist that I'd been working with and said, can I come and watch you working? And he said yes. And I spent 2 years drawing in the hospital, watching radiological procedures, the ones where they feed a catheter up through the body so they can image the brain and whatever other parts of the body they want. And I just got, it was extraordinary imagery. It was beautiful imagery, as I'm sure you know. It looked a bit, the brain looks a bit like, it's like a tree, it's like a Chinese print. And then I had to find a way of translating that into, because I had books and books and books of drawings, but I wanted to find a way of making something that wasn't just illustrative, that actually was trying to explore consciousness a bit more. So that was the beginning.
That's funny, because one of my questions, well, and we'll kind of expand on what you just said, because one of my questions was, what challenges do you tend to face when you're trying to translate that complex scientific concept into a visual art? And it may not be that long of an answer, but it was funny that you just kind of alluded to it there at the end.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong. Illustration is a medical illustration has a long and very noble history, but it's not what I do. I want to make work that is a visual equivalence of consciousness, or visual equivalence of brain activity. So I decided to explore etching. I was, at the same time I was drawing in the hospital, I had a fellowship at a London university in the print room, and I was working with an extraordinary printmaker, and I was showing him my drawings, and I said, how can we translate this? So we invented a method through etching to start with of we laid in etching, you have a smooth etching plate, and I drew on top of that with a pen, and then we threw a hand-shaken aquatint, which is a resin powder, on top of that. And then I started throwing chemicals into the resin. So it looked like a hemorrhage, so it looked like things were bleeding. And then we fixed that onto the plate, put it in the acid, and we got a wonderful series of etchings called brainscapes, which were some of the very earliest work I did on combining the relationship between the physical brain and our sense of self, really.
Oh.
So it was very exciting, both in terms of what I was seeing, but then to find, I'm always looking at finding ways of translation in my work from, sort of what I've seen into, because work is to be looked at, and I wanted an audience I wanted my pictures to look like they were transitory, like they might move into some other shape on the paper. So, and I think they did.
I would agree. Well, now that we're talking about like brainscapes and other projects, is there a significant project or piece, a specific project or piece that holds particular significance to you, and why, and maybe your most endearing project or piece?
Well, there's lots of different projects. There's two I'd like to mention in this context. The brainscapes were seminal for me because they made me realize I could translate. But after that, I was invited to a brain dissection at a hospital in the it was in the Parkinson's research department, and whilst I was looking at the dissection, they were laying it out in a very, very formal way on a steel metal tray, which looked to me just like an etching plate. And so I kept sort of sitting there thinking, wow, this is extraordinary. I mean, apart from the emotion of thinking this was a human being and that everything there'd been was contained, and, you know, because I'd never, you know, the thing about the brain, it's shut up in this, is dark inside the skull, this dark space. And so to actually see a human brain, and you can only ever see it either through scans, which, you know, obviously I did before, or through dissection. And it was, you know, for me, it was the first time I had been so close to a human brain, and I was allowed to hold it, which was an amazing thing. And I just thought, I wonder if I could be allowed to make an etching from a human brain, because the contact of that on the plate would be the most true portrait you could ever make of anybody, I felt. So I talked to the professor I was working with afterwards, and I muted what I wanted to do, and he wasn't averse to it. He said he'd take it to the committee and talk about it. And they came back to me and they said yes, because people had left their brains to science, but they'd also left them for to better the treatment of Parkinson's, which included visual things, you know, particularly photography. So they thought that the project itself would be very interesting. It would also be very honouring to the people who donated their brains, and also that it would be revolutionary in a way. And they were very clear that I was very clear with them that I didn't want to exploit it. I didn't want to be written up in the newspapers as sort of Dr. Death who was, you know, doing these terrible things. I wanted it to be very sensitive. So I always limited the editions I worked on. Anyway, the thing is, they said yes, which was unbelievable. And then there's always that terrible moment as an artist when you've asked to do something and you don't know if you can do it. So I've got this permission. I've got all these people waiting to see what I could do. And anyway, I went to work with a guy called Nigel Oxley, who was the print tutor I'd had when I had my fellowship at London Metropolitan. And we experimented firstly on some lamb's brains, and we found that brains are made up of a lot of fat, and fat is greasy, and etchings work on grease marks. So we felt fairly confident that we could get some marks, and the etchings we got from the lamb's brains were okay. But these brains had also been formaldehyde, so there was another sort of chemical composition. And so the day came I was allowed the brains for 24 hours, and the professor had to travel with me at all times and be near the brains in case, you know, because they were, you know, they were someone that he had got permission from. So he was with me. All the ethics were in place. We drove down to where my master etcher was, and we made the prints. We got these glorious marks, and it's a series of prints called transients. And we did 1, 2, 3. I think we got 6 etching plates in a day, which was amazing. And every one of them printed beautifully when we came to edition it. And so I think that might be the most extraordinary project I've ever done.
I could imagine that would be just insane to be a part of, and to, like you said, hold a human brain and be that close to a human brain. That would be completely fascinating.
And we cried in the middle of it, because you could never forget, as you held this slice of human brain, that, you know, it was someone just as you're someone with a brain inside your head. So it was very, very emotional. So I think that was the most extraordinary project I've ever done. And one of the ones I'm most proud of. The other project which was also extraordinary, but that was much more big budget, was a project I worked on for some scientists looking at new ways of treating epilepsy with brain implants. And for that project, it was a huge budget project. I decided I interviewed lots of people with epilepsy, and so I had all their tests. I had about 100 testimonies, and I didn't want to. It was about them. It wasn't about me. This work, so it was really important that I didn't interfere with their testimonies. So, with a number of students, I embroidered the text onto 100 pieces of antique clothing, and what I decided to do with it, and antique clothing because. In Victorian times in England, people with epilepsy were often incarcerated in institutions. And it seems to me that these old night dresses looked like sort of institutionalized objects. And I managed to work with some computer scientists to make an installation where these 100 pieces of embroidered underwear with the stories of epileptic experience on them moved in the rhythm of an epileptic brain. They were hung from the ceiling. You can see it on. There's a film of it on my website, but it was the most extraordinary. Again, the scale of it was huge. The impact of it was huge, and then it got shut down in lockdown, and then it's never really after a few days. So it's very sad, but stuff happens to everyone, not just to me. So those are the two projects that probably excited me the most.
What way do you hope your art impacts the viewer's understanding of maybe their own minds? Or if that is that what you want them to experience? I know beauty is in how someone perceives it, but you obviously have some intent of how you would like it to be.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, the truth is, as soon as a piece of art goes public, you have no control over how people react to it. So you have to let it go. But there's always intention. You're quite right there. As I was saying, with the brainscapes and some of my early scan works, I wanted people to just think about the inside of their bodies, that we're not, the self is not just the outside, that we are an extraordinary, I mean, the brilliance of the way, we're made is extraordinary. The fact that no one can really understand what consciousness is, why we need it, what it does. So that's always, so I like the work to try and question that. So for instance, I've made works a long time ago using MRI scans, and I've scraped into them to show an imagination at work, to just to try and, because the scan is an object where I think people hold it dear. They think they're looking into themselves, but really they're still just looking at anatomy. So, I often play with that just to sort of take it a step further. And then, hope people realize what an extraordinary thing imagination is. My goodness, how do you account for that? I mean, there's been other works, like I did a project with some scientists about schizophrenia called Reassembling the Self. And in that work, I worked with two artists who had a schizophrenia diagnosis. And I didn't want to impose what I thought schizophrenia was on the project, because that's not interesting. What's interesting is the lived experience and maybe the medical narratives and the what do you call it, when you take medicine,
pharmacological
narrative. Yeah, beautifully. Thank you. It's a longer word than I can manage tonight. And so for that work, I made a series of lithographs where I put together the body in the wrong order. It looked like a body, but the hip bone was there, and the bit of the brain was down the leg and things like that. So I wanted the pictures to be really uncomfortable, so that people, because that was the experience I learned from listening to people with schizophrenia, is that they felt that they had been robbed of their future in a way, and they felt that they were all mixed up. And I wanted somehow that, the work to make the audience look uncomfortable. So that's the best sort of thing I can do with that. Then I also work. I mean, sleep was another project I did, and I worked. And I kept thinking the interesting thing about sleep is that it's a nothingness. You know, sleep is darkness. Sleep. How do you represent sleep? So there, I just played with the pillowcase, the indentation of a head in the pillowcase, and I also found 400 embroiderers all around Britain who embroidered their sleep stories. So the whole exhibition was full of different narratives of what sleep might be, because nobody really knows why or how we sleep or what the mechanisms are of it in the brain. So again, I like the audience just to think about the ordinary things you do, like imagine or sleep, and then think of what a wonder it is, really.
That's beautiful. I like that. That's beautiful, actually. Well, speaking of your projects, do you have any upcoming projects or themes that you're toying with or excited to explore or looking to explore in the future? Or
Yeah, I've just finished a project. Well, I'm in the middle of a project called Modern Alchemy, which is a project about. I'm working with a chemist up in Edinburgh at the university there, looking at how chemistry could change the bonds of different metals in order to try and make batteries that aren't made from lithium. So it's an ecological project to try and stop devastating the landscape and the environment by mining these very rare metals, and to try and make it more
eco-friendly.
thank you, eco-friendly.
Yeah.
And that's been interesting because the scientist was very engaged with the idea, and I decided to work with. I usually work on steel plates. No, I don't. I work on zinc plates, which are very expensive. And I decided to work on steel plates because they were a cheaper metal to mirror what she was doing. And she let me etch the plates in her laboratory. She mixed up all the solutions for me. And we even played with something called aqua regia, which is what olden day alchemists used to dissolve gold. So I had the most experimental time, and that was last summer up in Edinburgh, and that was wonderful. I got wonderful etchings from that, and that project we're hoping to take forward when we get more funding to do it, because we feel we've just scratched the surface and we want to go further. And then at the moment, I'm looking at sanctuary and migration and refugees, because well, it's such a major problem in the world now. It's a global problem, and every government's trying to pretend it doesn't happen. Don't come to us, go somewhere else. I come from a migrant background. My grandmother was Italian. She came to Britain 100 years ago in 1924. And so I'm working with social scientists, trying to see if we can make we're having an exhibition opening in October with lots of events to try and change minds, really. The idea is to see if people, if you're faced with individual narratives, everyone's very sympathetic. You demonize people, you call them illegal, and you immediately dehumanize them. So I'm going through a very political phase at the moment, and that's that's my next major project. Is again, it's an embroidery project, and again, it's a ceiling hung installation, and we're very excited about it opening on October the 2nd.
Oh, wow, that's coming up.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you are a wonderful interview because you literally answered all my questions during your answers of other questions. Which you made it way too easy on me, and I love hearing about your projects. They're fascinating, and how you got to them, and how they are definitively art and science blended. Even when you go political or environmental, obviously that's still art and science. And public health, all of it involves around public health.
Yeah, it's just about public. I mean, our project is very much about quality of life and mental health of refugees, and what the project's called Belongings. And it's what happens when you exclude people from society and they can't feel ever at home that they belong. It has huge mental health. Yeah, I think the dichotomy between art and science is lunatic myself, and so
You can't have one without the other.
you can't have one without. I mean, my etching is all science, and it was proved last summer working in the scientist laboratory. The world is science, and I only wish that I had studied more science in my time, but I think I'm making up for it now.